Fredericton, West Hanwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for our Minister of Military Affairs. As New Brunswickers, we're all proud of the work done by our troops from base Gagetown as they deploy overseas and even here at home. Within the last few weeks, many troops from base Gagetown have deployed overseas to the Middle East. Now, professional soldiers should always be treated as such. They should always deploy overseas with their personal weapons. They should always conduct their duties in uniform. And they should always be tasked with their own personal security and never be asked to rely on others to defend those troops. These are fundamental, inalienable principles of being a soldier. So I'm wondering if our Minister of Military Affairs here in New Brunswick is satisfied that these core principles are being followed in the current deployment of New Brunswick troops overseas to the Middle East.
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety and Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister responsible for military affairs, it's our duty to consult and to communicate with the leaders of CFB Gagetown in our situation. We have continually met with the commander of CFB Gagetown, Colonel. We keep on talking with him. We go to events to make sure that if there's anything we can do as a provincial government, we will surely assist. We were looking at ways that we can helping families to come who live in our area, to settle in our areas. They're not just living in Oromocto or CFB Gagetown, the PMQs. They're everywhere. They're in the Fredericton, Oromocto area, and they're living in everybody's communities. So we will continue to communicate with the Colonel, the base commander at CFB Gagetown, and help them in any way that we can as a province, not the federal government. Thank you.
Member for Fredericton, West Hanwell.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Well, along with the Minister of Military Affairs, I share his confidence in our troops. But the reality is that they're not always their own masters. As soldiers, their fortunes are dictated by politicians, and they follow the orders they receive. And their deployments, the conditions of their deployments and the nature of their deployment and the location of their deployment isn't up to them, it's up to their political masters. So my question for the Minister of New Brunswick Military Affairs is he communicating with his colleagues and peers at the federal government, his political colleagues, as the Minister of National Defence, the Prime Minister, to make sure that every possible measure is being taken care of our soldiers that are deployed to the Middle East, and that every possible measure is being taken to ensure their self-defence?
Minister of Public Safety and Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will certainly continue to speak with Colonel McIsaac of the CFB Gagetown and our federal counterparts. I'm sure Colonel McIsaac is well aware of how their soldiers are treated. I'm sure they have the number one rated equipment that they do need. We will certainly make sure we keep that open lines of communication with our federal counterparts. As of now, I have not spoken with the federal the minister yet, but we will certainly make sure we reach out to the person and make sure that our troops that do go overseas are safe and have the proper equipment. Thank you.
Member for Fredericton, West Hanwell.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know Colonel McIsaac well. He's an excellent fellow. The reality is Colonel McIsaac's not responsible for where our troops get deployed overseas, and he's not responsible for how they're equipped and how their self-defense measures are taken care of. So my question again for the Minister is, can he assure the House today that he will speak with our Minister of National Defence and question that Minister on how our troops are being guarded overseas, what their personal equipment is, what their personal weapons are, and make sure that all of our New Brunswick troops that are deployed to the Middle East have the proper personal equipment to be responsible for their own self-defense.
Honourable Minister of Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, we will keep our lines of communication open with CFB Gagetown. I think that's very important. I want to make sure, I grew up in that environment. My father was in the military, very proud of it. My brothers also served in the military as well as nephews. I want to make sure when they do go overseas to protect our country and our province and our citizens here, I want to make sure they do have the proper equipment. I want to make sure that the lines of communication will always remain open. That's why we are back and forth with Colonel McIsaac, and I'm sure that being the base Gagetown commander, he certainly should be well aware of what is needed for his troops. To open the lines of communication for the Minister federally, I will certainly look into keeping those lines of communications open as well. I want to make sure that the communication, what I've learned so far to being in this position, is that communication has been lacking very much in government in the last 4 years. And I want to continue to reopen those lines of communications, and will continue to do so. Thank you.